Hi, this is Harriet Grayson, your host and producer of Community Culture Showcase. And guess what? It's finally summer. Yes, it is. The temperatures are climbing and all of those wonderful activities you want to do in warm weather. Well, one of my most favorite things is to go to the water, to the beach. In fact, it was our theme for our last art show, Water, Water Everywhere. So we live in this gorgeous coastal communities where there's water, water everywhere. And I'm thrilled to have with me a ship captain who has a most extraordinary stories to tell us. And we're also, later on in the interview, we're going to show a video of my friend Lisa Saunders interviewing our Captain Bill as he tells us about shipwrecks. So, Captain Bill, tell us a little bit about yourself and your boating life and how you got involved with it.
Well, as a young child, I lived on a lake. And I used to walk down to the end of the lake, stand on the bridge, and look into the water and wondered what lay beneath it. Mm-hmm. And I started snorkeling and skin diving, but, I mean, your bottom time was limited. And it wasn't until I was released from the Army that the state of Connecticut gave me $10 a month for every month served on active duty during war, which was the Vietnam War, and up to a maximum of $300, I should say. I took the money, I saw an ad in the paper for scuba gear, and I bought my first scuba gear. Wow. You know, which consisted of tank, wetsuit, and so forth. Mm-hmm. Ventured back to the lake in April, ripped the suit, but I sat on the bottom for a few minutes, and I was just amazed that I could actually breathe underwater. And that sort of launched me or started my career. Okay. So that was back in '69. I don't want to date myself now.
No. You and I are from the same age. Yeah, we're not going to date ourselves. Absolutely not. So now, fast forward. Here we are, 2018. What are you doing with these, with the boats now?
Basically the same as I did back when I first started running a charter boat. A friend of mine from New Jersey said to me, because at the time I had a small boat, mm-hmm. He said, you know, if you got your license and you started taking out a few people, you could then afford to buy electronics, which would enable you to find these wrecks that you're looking for. Okay. Because, you know, my entire being was captivated by the sunken ships and the men that sailed and ran them. And each ship has its own story. If you don't know the history of that particular ship, then you might as well be diving on a rock. Mm-hmm. So I started in '74, got my license, and I haven't looked back, and I'm still doing the same thing today. And it's not only me, it's the people that I associate with. And what we actually feel is that we are preserving our coastal history by diving on these wrecks, looking for them, and videotaping them. And we share it with the general public by doing video presentations and regular presentations.
Is there any legal issues? Because who owns those wrecks? I mean, some of them are, you know, quite old.
Yeah. You know, it depends. The state might say that you know, there's an antiquity law and that you can't take anything, you know, from this vessel. And I believe it was in the early '80s that they enacted these laws. But prior to that, people literally went out there and salvaged them. Mm-hmm. You know, as an example, there was a picture in a magazine. There was a submarine, the G1, which was sunk off Taylor Point in Newport, or out in Newport Harbor. And you could see the rear of this submarine being hoisted out of the water and being then sold for scrap. Mm. And that to me is sad. Like anything that I've found, I've gone to great ends to preserve, to date, to catalog, and I've never sold a thing, and nor has my friends. You know, to me, it's like prostituting history. Mm-hmm. You know, and we're not about to do that.
Is the water, is it because the water is cold enough or salty or what? How does, like wood, most of these ships must have been wood, the ones that from certainly the 1800s and the early 1900s, yeah?
That's gone.
Oh, they're gone.
Yeah, okay. And what I mean by that is we have worms in our water, and most southern waters have these same worms. They eat wood.
Okay.
So all that is left is the machinery.
Okay.
And, you know, right off Watch Hill, I mean, there's two shipwrecks that are of great historical interest. One of which is the Metis, which was rammed by a small schooner in August of 1872. They didn't think there was much damage, so she continued on to Providence, and only to find that she was flooding quick, and she sunk with a great loss of life. Now that's off Watch Hill, or I should say a little southeast of Watch Hill.
Right.
Now there's no semblance of wood. There's a propeller shaft, a propeller, an engine, you know, anything that was steel is there, as well as copper. Copper, anything made of copper is well preserved. And it's covered with fish nets.
How do you know what you found?
By doing research. Most of it's obvious, you know.
Okay. You know, is there like a number on the propeller and you could look up that number and know that that belonged to X, Y, or Z ship?
No.
No. Okay.
No, you know what's, you know, through research, through spending an inordinate amount of time in various libraries and going over charts, NOAA publications.
That's the atmospheric and research.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, you know what they do is they drag the coast too. They look for shipwrecks, obstructions, and you know what's in the area. So you know that, for example, the Metis was a propeller-driven steam vessel. It was a single-cylinder steam vessel. So now you find this. It has a propeller. It's single-cylinder. You know it's the Metis. And if you're fortunate, you might find something with the ship's name. A friend of mine found a bronze plaque that probably hung in the Metis's engine room, and it says Metis on it. So you definitely know this is the Metis.
Exactly, exactly. Now, is there an interest in bringing these things up off of and maybe putting them in the aquarium or some kind of maritime museum?
You know, it's sort of a fine line. A lot of the curators for these various museums do not give us much credit. Let us say the Ocean Explorer. I hate to say wreck diver, but the Ocean Explorer. And the reason being is because we don't have the particular sheepskin that says, you know, marine archaeologist. But I'm going to tell you, 50 years on the bottom definitely serves a purpose, and you can't buy experience. So these people are really missing out by what the wreck diver has to offer. And some of them are very narrow-minded and very blinded as to what's going on. You know, I'll cite you an example.
Sure.
Some people think that the shipwreck should be left alone. Then why did they look for it if they feel that way? You know, and I call these people the privileged few because they're the only ones that have seen it. And it's our history. It's our coastal history. As an example, the Titanic. Dr. Ballard found the Titanic. But, again, he used all Navy resources. And to his credit, I mean, he did a darn good job.
Right.
And he also said that nobody should go there or take anything. But yet, he went there. Now, other people other than his people went out there and they resurrected these artifacts. And they have them on display. And the general public is now able to go in.
Sure.
You know, they've read about the Titanic. They've heard about it. These people now, for the price of a ticket or admission, can now go in and actually hold an artifact from this vessel. And this show has toured the entire United States and met with great success. So that's what I mean. It's, you know, I consider myself one of the privileged few because I am able to go down and do this. And I then share what I've done or found or restored with the general public, that in the artifact itself as well as in video presentations.
So that's where Greg comes in. Greg has allowed you to film what you're doing and therefore preserving it and letting lots and lots of other people have a look. And so if you tell us a little bit about how you got to meet Captain Bill and how this whole thing started about doing your kind of documentary.
Well, I met him through a friend, and you know, went out on the boat and everything, and the idea was that we were going to do a television show. And the name of the show was Last Voyage, and basically it was going to be the story of each one of these vessels and what happened on leading up to that last trip, and then actually doing maybe a reenactment or something like that along the lines of that. But as a show that you have to sell and get sponsors for commercial television, whether you're doing it for, you know, Discovery or one of the big, you know, cable channels, it's a difficult sell because a lot of young program managers in stations today don't understand the value of history. And I think one of my goals in terms of telling stories with Bill and writing history stories is that the millennials, who are so important to what's the future of our country, in our last election, only less than 20% of them voted. And that is absolutely a crying shame. And part of it is because they don't understand how important history is to their lives. So with what Bill said, we want to try to make history exciting through the videos, and to do that you have to tell it as an adventure story instead of what you would read in a book in school. And that format or genre has been pretty well established now that you...
Sort of reality TV?
It's kind of a reality, exactly. It's a reality TV show, and we actually shot it like that, where we went out on Bill's boat, and he's joking around, and he looks, and the weather's, you know, getting stormy, and geez, should we go out or not? I don't know if we're going to be able to dive, and then we go out, and we're going through fog, and this and that, and one thing or another, and then Bill puts on all the gear. And the first thing you notice when you're filming this, and I'm filming it with a high-definition video camera. We had 2 cameras for the show thing on the boat, and it's the amazing amount of gear that these guys put on to go down, you know, hundreds of feet underwater.
Is part of that because it's so cold that you don't want to get
Yeah, well, Bill can go into the technical thing, but they're not even breathing oxygen. They're breathing a mixture of gases, and they've got a spare tank. And so as Bill's clipping on more and more equipment, I'm like, he's starting to look like this spaceman in a spacesuit, you know, like you're leaving the International Space Station. He gets in the water, he goes down, and of course Bill did the underwater video cinematography for the documentaries, because you know, I'm not a diver.
Right.
So we combined his footage in the editing system with the footage that we shot topside on the boat, and turned it into our first documentary, which was called The Last Voyage of the U-853, which is the German submarine U-boat off of Block Island. And in the video, it shows Bill squeezing into the little opening 135 feet down. And he's got to put the stuff over his head, and he swims along, and you can actually, once you get inside, even though there's a lot of corrosion and growth, marine growth, you can see the bones of the crew from the German sailors who died on that submarine. And
that must be a little spooky.
Well, Bill will tell you too, and you'll see it. There's a clip in the video that we're going to show of Bill going into the submarine and seeing the bones and all that. So we're producing a lot more. We've got a lot more ideas that we're working on. We're working on a reality TV show called Charter Wars, which is about the charter fleet up in Galilee, and we're still hopeful for the Last Voyage series, although we may change the title to something like History's Coast or something like that. So we're working on it, and Bill's working on a new book on the wreck of the Atlantic, so we're out shooting a lot of stuff on that. So we're keeping really busy doing it.
And Lisa, how did you get involved with these 2 guys?
I read about Captain Bill shortly after moving to Mystic, I don't know, maybe a couple years after moving to Mystic in 2010. It was in the Mystic River Press, and it was about the shipwreck explorer and all these things he found. And I'm reading it and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is out of Mystic, this guy. Like, I've always dreamed of meeting a shipwreck explorer. And then it occurred to me, I'd actually read about him in the book Shadow Divers, which was a New York Times bestseller. And these couple of guys were they're trying to figure out what German submarine they had found at the bottom of the ocean. They couldn't figure it out, going down multiple dives. So there's a couple pages where they go to this crazy guy's house in Connecticut. He's the crazy guy. And they portray him as this cigar chomping guy with his mannequin dressed up in all kinds of crazy outfits. And he's the one who helps them figure it out. He says, you look for a tag that'll tell you, I forget what it tells you, but he's the one who told them how to figure it out. And so I'm thinking, oh my gosh, maybe there's a way for me to meet this guy now that I live near him. Because I was living in New York when I read Shadow Divers. So then I got in touch with the newspaper, and I don't know if they gave me his contact info, or I just found him by Googling Captain Bill Palmer. Maybe I found him. And I called, and I couldn't believe he actually answered the phone. Anyway, so I begged him to come on my TV show. So we sat in this studio on my show, and then I went to his house, and we filmed me interviewing him about some of the things that he has. And then he has had me come out on his boat a couple times. And in the film you're going to show, it was one of those times that I came out on his boat and I interviewed him about some of the things that we were going to go see, because he has taken us to go with him. We didn't dive, right. But we went out to see some of the sites where he goes, because some of the shipwrecks you can actually see on a clear day, right? We didn't, but you can, right? Yeah.
They point themselves up out of the water?
Shallow water.
Oh, okay, that's where they sunk. Okay.
Some of them. So anyway,
so we would like to, if we can, why don't we run the tape, if you can, show this video of Captain Bill being interviewed by Lisa, and there's some watery pictures in there as well, and some fisherman's humor, as we have a real look at what it's like to go under the water and look for wrecks. I think we're ready to roll the camera.
Saunders, author of the Mystic Seafarers Trail, and we are actually on the Mystic Seafarers Trail right now. We're off the shore of Noank at the moment, and I am on the boat Thunderfish with Captain Bill Palmer. I have always dreamed my whole life of meeting a shipwreck explorer, and I finally did it when I moved to Mystic, and you can do it too, actually, because his boat is here in Mystic for the summer. We're here to interview him about what's going on down the Mystic River, in Fisher's Island Sound, off Block Island, off Fisher's Island, the different shipwrecks that Bill explores and finds artifacts on, and even some dead bodies.
We're steaming out the Mystic River, and we're going to very shortly turn the wheel to the south and head towards Fisher's Island, which is about maybe a little less than a mile off the coast of Connecticut. And ironically enough, it's owned by New York, so we have to abide by the New York laws. In 1895 or thereabouts, the Spanish steamer Olinda, in dense fog, went aground and went to pieces on the south side of the island, and that's where we're headed. We're talking about shipwrecks that sunk in the 1800s, early 1900s. There wasn't any radar. So without modern electronics, navigation was somewhat difficult, especially in the fog. Some captains chose to sit on the anchor until the fog lifted. Others didn't, and they paid the price, such as the Olinda. Believe it or not, on the chart there's a little area marked Wreck Island, and that's the final resting place of the Olinda. Not much there. Couple boilers, a propeller shaft, rudder, scattered wreckage, plates, but it's a phenomenal dive in the sense that the visibility generally is always good. It's a white sandy bottom, There's little to no current, and it's a great place for the beginner, or for that matter, even the experienced diver. One can virtually stand on the deck of the boat and look down in 20 feet of water and see the wreck, although it's not really recognizable as a wreck because it's covered with kelp and other forms of marine life. But it's a great dive, and it's a great area. Heck, man, you could go there just to relax and enjoy it. Sort of like a sanctuary. It is a little tiny nature-like breakwater. There's comrades that lay on it, so I thoroughly enjoy going there.
You mean laying on it? You mean at low tide it's sticking out?
Yeah, it's a natural rock formation, and you can see it in some of the pictures that I have of the Olinda. I mean, it hasn't changed in well over 100 years. And what's sort of wild is you become a naturalist. Cormorants, they're birds that feed on fish on the bottom or in mid-water, and they have no oil in their wings, or very little oil. So these birds will come out of the water, sit on the rocks or pilings, and elongate their wings and dry them out so that they can take flight. So yeah, it's a beautiful place.
Now, with all these recent hurricanes we've had up here in the Northeast, do you think any of the shipwrecks that you regularly go to could reveal new treasure of any kind?
Oh, absolutely. Most wrecks, if not all wrecks, carried large amounts of gold, silver, jewels, precious stones, and paper currency. But that's mostly gone, so we're just looking for the gold today.
So was there loss of life?
No, not on the Olinda. Relatively shallow water. Generally, when you have fog, it's calm. The only thing that you don't have is the ability to free yourself from the rocks or the sand, and that was the case of the Olinda. You go a couple miles down the coast to the east, and you've got the Onondaga. Now, the Onondaga was a Clyde Line steamship that, again, dense fog hit the end of Watch Hill, what I call Watch Hill Reef, which is right across from the Coast Guard station, and she sank in 50 feet of water, and again attributed to dense fog. Sometimes, like the other day, I was out here and I had less than 400 feet of visibility. So yeah, you're steaming along. You can't stop a boat of that magnitude. Small boats such as mine, sure you can, but something that big, it's got so much momentum that's it.
What are people hitting? Rocks formations? Because New England has a very rocky coastline. Is that what they're hitting?
Yeah, there's a reef that stretches from the end of Fisher's Island east to Watch Hill, Rhode Island. And it's all up and down reef. I mean, there's a couple passages through it, such as Lord's Passage, Wickapesset Passage. But again, in the days where there was no electronics, that reef claimed a lot of ships. As a matter of fact, Admiral Perry's flagship in the, I think it was 1814, struck that reef, Watch Hill Reef, on the other side of where the Onondaga sunk. And she went down. Matter of fact, they tried to free her by lightening the load, such as dumping cannon, anything that they could get rid of to free themselves. And I think she was eventually pulled off, but anything that could be thrown overboard was.
So the War of 1812, there were a lot of ships wrecked out here, right? For some British ships. Do you know anything about those?
The only one I know about is the Revenge, Perry ship. But, during the Revolution, Newport Harbor, there's half a dozen British men of war. They were smaller, and I'm not sure of what type they were. But the French had the harbor blockaded, and what the English did is they set the ships on fire and ran them aground so they couldn't be used against them. They were going to be captured. So, yeah, there's a half a dozen British men of war in Newport Harbor. One is right off the Newport War College in like 30 feet of water, and all that's left are ballast stones and some cannon. Now, in our waters, especially in the summertime, we have worms that eat wood. So what you're going to find now is anything that's of steel or rock. Anything that's wood basically is gone because the worms have eaten it.
Now, you've been on a lot of wrecks where there was loss of life, like the Andrea Doria. That's a famous one. They call it the Mount Everest of shipwreck diving. Why do they call that one the Mount Everest of shipwreck?
Well, I guess it's such a challenge to get to. You know, first of all, it's about 40 miles off Nantucket in a major shipping lane from Europe to New York. And at times there's a vicious current that you can't swim against. It's deep, it's in 250 feet of water. And just until recently, you know, let's say in the last 20 years, people have died on that wreck owing to the fact that the equipment that they were using, you know, was not suitable for that depth. But yet people still wanted to try to do it. If you look right over here, that's Ram Island, okay, right to our south. And I want to say around 1932-38, the Brenton Reef lightship caught fire. She was at the docks here in Noank, Mystic, and they cut her loose. And she drifted up onto the beach where she burnt and fully sank. And over the years, there's virtually nothing left except for a few bronze spikes.
Now, there's some really tragic shipwrecks off this area, some that you feel very emotional about, and you've even found bodies, human remains on. Do you have a particular wreck that holds a lot of meaning to you, or list a few that have, and what you've seen and what you think?
Well, yeah, you know, they all do, really. The U-853, which is off Block Island, 7 miles east of Block Island. I mean, the crew is still aboard. One man decided the fate of 49 others, and that was the captain of the boat, and he didn't make a wise decision. He was ordered to cease all hostilities 4 days before the war ended, and he never acknowledged. And I think that was a matter of choice because he was still looking for prey. And when I saw this submarine coming into view, the excitement again was just outrageous. I think I covered that whole submarine in about 5 minutes. I swam, well, like I was possessed, to the bow. I swam to the stern, back to the anchor line and up. It was amazing. I think I even cherished the rust I had on my wetsuit as being part of the U-boat. Right. And what sticks in my mind especially is the former captain of that U-boat was wounded, and while recuperating from his wounds, the captain that's still with her to this day, Firmsdorf, went to visit him. And Captain Summers said, "Listen, the war's nearly at an end. Do not be frivolous with the crew. They're all good boys. Make sure you bring them home." And Firmsdorf said, yeah, he would. And here they sit to this day, waiting to come home. And that to me is very, very sad. My partner and I are going to start to explore the interior of this once mighty hunter. As I said before, it's a tight squeeze, and if you're claustrophobic, don't try it. I lift my pressure gauges over my head and finally, and I say finally, manage to squeeze inside. Once inside, I acclimate myself, then start to move forward to explore the forward torpedo room. Bill signals me he's okay. I'll then swim through the bulkhead, being careful not to get hung up on pipe or conduit. To my immediate left is a torpedo in its rack, awaiting the order to be loaded. Thank God it never came. Still moving forward, the two top tubes come into view. The starboard one has a girl's name written on it, Hannah Laura. The doorway in front of us leads to the galley. On either side of the door, the steel has almost rotted away, leaving just a frame. In the NCO quarters aboard the UH-53, the crew is still present. These young men ranged in age from 18 to 22 years old. I slowly keep moving astern. As I do so, I have to squeeze through these narrow door openings, making sure not to get hung up. In front of me is a doorway that leads into the captain's and officer's quarters. Before entering, I turn to my left and I wonder how this one stove did the cooking for 50+ men. Looking to my right, still more of the crew is visible. Moving into officer country, it's a total mess. One has to proceed with extreme caution. Here I look at collapsed lockers and miscellaneous piping. The silt in this area is 3 or 4 feet thick. Once you disturb this fine silt, your visibility goes to absolute zero. And now you have to feel your way out. Swimming into the control room, directly in front of me is the periscope well, as well as piles of 20mm and 37mm ammunition. To my left is the plainsman station. Not much room to move around. On the deck is an ammunition container, and behind it is the attack periscope. This ammunition container contains 20mm rounds. It was once bolted to the wall. We're looking at where the captain sat, looking into the periscope. This is where the attack was planned and carried out. Backing out, I look up into the conning tower and beyond. Very sad.
Now, they did actually pull one body right after the wreck from it, and he's buried locally, right?
He's buried in Newport, and that was in 1960.
When you've gone there and see that somebody leaves a rose there, what does it say on the stone if they can't identify the body?
Well, you know, a friend of mine alerted me to that. He said, you know, every time he's gone to that particular cemetery to do research, he's noticed that at that grave someone has left flowers. No other graves, but that grave. So it's sort of a mystery as to who and why would leave flowers there. All it says is crew member UH-53.
The one wreck that I keep thinking about is the one where they wrecked in winter and the bodies were encased in ice and came up to shore on Block Island. Which wreck is that?
That's the Larchmont. She was wrecked on February the 11th, 1907, approximately 2 miles south of Watch Hill. And that's really a tragic story. The Larchmont was bound from Providence to New York with a load of cargo and passengers, and she was a paddle wheel steamer. It was a blizzard, meaning that she was, or a northwester. She was blowing 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 miles an hour, and it was a blizzard as well. So I mean, you've got snow coming down sideways, and again, no navigation equipment, no radar. You know, we're fortunate to have that. Out of the storm appeared a coal schooner, the Harry Knowlton, who was making all available speed because he was landlocked, you know, for several days and behind schedule. And unfortunately, trying to avert the collision, the Larchmont actually turned into the bow of the Knowlton. The Larchmont burst into flames because a main steam drum exploded, and she sunk in something like 10 minutes. Now, you know, the water temperature was probably like, you know, February the 11th, 32 degrees, because salt water freezes at, what, 28. So people took to the lifeboats, jumped into the water, but there was little hope for survival. And if you read the newspaper articles, one man actually committed suicide by slashing his throat, knowing that he was just going to sit there and suffer till he expired. So he preferred to end it rather than go through all the suffering. There were 17 survivors. Amongst them was the captain, who had rowed around the lee side of the boat in the hopes of picking up passengers, but the wind was so damn fierce that blew him away. And I believe with him was a small boy who managed to survive. And like I say, there were 17 survivors. Most of the bodies washed up on the northern end of Block Island. They laid there, encased in ice, and transported to the North Light, which is a lighthouse on the end of Block Island, stacked like you would cordwood, until they were able to be brought back to the mainland.
Well, for more information on the Mystic Seafarers Trail and to read the excerpts of the book, you can visit my website at authorlisasaunders.com. For more information about Captain Bill Palmer and his book and finds and films on these shipwrecks, go to thunderfishcharters.com. Thank you. Hoping to see you on the Thunderfish someday.
Well, that was some story, and I guess there's lots of other little pieces that go with that. So, Bill, we were talking, while the video was showing, so tell us a little bit about the German sub, about one particular family contacting you.
Yeah, since I've written a book and produced a few videos on that particular wreck, you know, we've got the internet and Facebook and all this media. A family in Germany that had an uncle aboard the 853 contacted me. And by doing so, they also sent me pictures of him and his brother, his two other brothers, and wanted to know if I wanted more family history. And of course I said yes. And I told him that I would send him a book. Now, there's 50 men on the U-boat.
Right.
And no one was taken off the U-boat except for this one man whose family contacted me. And his name was Hoffman. And the first man down, they were looking for the logbook, opened up the hatch, couldn't get inside, and this is a hard-hat diver. And he was a very small man. His name was Bockelman. So Bockelman reached down, put a rope around this German sailor's neck, and yanked him out. The body was then taken aboard a small whaleboat, transferred to the Penguin, a Navy salvage vessel, and then transferred to like a Navy tug. I think it was, and I'm probably wrong, the 123. It didn't really have a name, it had a number.
Right.
From there, and now this was all classified information, but you know, after 70 plus years, it's declassified.
Right.
That tug then sailed into New London with Hoffman's body. It was offloaded and signed for by a, I want to say fleet commander or someone who was in charge of X amount of submarines. I think his name was Thayer. He signed for the body. The sub-base hospital then picked up the body, signed for by the medical officer on duty, and that's where the story ends. And I've been trying to find out what happened to Hoffman so that I could notify the family.
That's a sweet story.
Yeah,
Yes,
I
yes.
mean, you know, it's hey, we're still going after the remains of our servicemen.
Sure.
You know, both in Korea, in Europe, and in Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to do the same because, I mean, you know, they're families.
Yes, of course,
You
of
know,
course.
they're boys that they didn't know what they were doing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they were sailing for a madman.
Right.
You know, and that being Adolf Hitler, and they didn't realize.
Yes,
You know,
of course, of course. So tell us, what are you currently working on?
I'm working on a book right now.
Okay, tell us about it.
And the book is on the steamship Atlantic. It was a Vanderbilt steamship, and it was the pride of the fleet, the Norwich Line, which sailed out of New London, Allen Point, Stonington. And, you know, it was a coastal boat. It was 330 feet long, paddle wheeler, and it was a very tragic story. She took on passengers. Again, her last stop was Allen Point. And the weather was worsening. It was gale force winds. They were trying to make it to New York. And it was the night before Thanksgiving. Mm-hmm. And I would imagine that these people wanted to get to New York to be with their loved ones on Thanksgiving Day. So she leaves New London. And again, they didn't think they were going to sail, but the captain felt that he had a good boat beneath them. It was almost brand new. Mm-hmm. And off they go. They got as far as approaching Niantic when they blew a steam pipe, which then caught the vessel on fire. That was extinguished. The vessel drifted for 2 nights and a day before it finally came ashore on Fisher's Island. And again, you know, you're looking at hurricane force winds.
Sure.
And although she was only 25, 30 feet offshore, there was a great, great loss of life. I believe half the people were killed. And a very tragic story was the Waltons. There was a family of 8, and all but one was killed. The father jumped into the water, and immediately his arm was broken. You know, you have to envision the ship smashing against the rocks, trapping the people, and it was sad. It was very, very sad. As a matter of fact, the good people of New London erected a monument commemorating the sinking of the Atlantic, and I believe, if I have the name right, the Forest Grove Cemetery, you know, here in Groton, New London. And you could see that monument. It's about 20 feet high, and it also mentions the family Waltons.
Have you actually seen the wreck?
No, there's nothing to be seen.
Everything was smashed up?
175 years.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you know,
okay. All right.
Again, it was, you know, 1846. Now, this ship went completely to pieces. And there's a lot of stories that came from it, such as the bell. The bell was a very pronounced story in itself. And rumor had it, as this ship was being beaten against the rocks, the bell was ringing. And rumor had it that the bell would not stop ringing until the last body had come ashore. And that bell now resides in New York. At the museum on South Street.
Okay, South Street Seaport. Yes.
Exactly. And the bell was sizable. I mean, it was quite a story. It was used in a church for a while, and it now resides at the seaport, and it's about 2 stories up.
Wow.
And it weighed about 300 pounds, or, you know, so I've read.
Okay.
Phil, let me ask you a question. The wreckage of that giant iron looks like a boiler on the beach. Do you think that's part of the Atlantic?
Yeah, I think so. There's a big round piece of steel, and I thought it could possibly be part of the smokestack. Because again, you know, you've got hurricane force winds, and it could very easily have toppled over or washed ashore. Although I believe it was the New London Day that carried a story a couple years back that said an 8-year-old boy was found inside the boiler alive. Now, I'm a little skeptical of that, but since there was no fire and you could close the door and she was going to pieces, maybe somebody stuck the boy in or maybe he crawled in. But again, I really don't believe it. So
now so you're interested in the shipwreck, right? So what's the steps that you take to kind of satisfy your curiosity? Well, what are you going to do? What have you done?
Well, we went there.
Okay.
And we found that there's nothing really on the surface. Now, years ago, I was researching this wreck, and I was using the Seaport Library, and I knew it was off North Hill. So North Hill it's not a really big place, and we just started, you know, diving that area. And again, we're looking at 1974, 75, 76, and we did find pieces of the ship. But you had to dig down maybe 2 feet, move the sand, move boulders, and very, very fortunate that we found some spoons. And the spoons had the ship's name stamped on them. Oh,
cool.
So now you definitely knew it was the Atlantic. This is where she went ashore. And, you know, this is the place where it happened. This is where the tragedy occurred. So, and again, I put together a video on the Atlantic. And when I do a presentation, I also take the spoon, or, you know, a couple of these spoons, and I bring them with me to show the people. Because half the spoons are still embedded in what we call concretion, which over the years, steel has formed an outer shell and sand is laid on top of that, then more steel. And you don't know, it doesn't have the shape. But if you break it open a little bit, there was a spoon.
Wow.
So it's sort of like, what's
like
his,
a sculpture.
what's his name's sword? I've got a senior moment.
King Arthur's.
King Arthur's sword embedded in the rock. And I've cleaned the spoon so that it's, you can see the silver and you can see the ship's name and the rest is embedded. So it's Arthur's sword. And again, I share this with the public.
Right, exactly. So that's your current project. And say you had a bucket list of things that you wanted to do. What else is in that bucket list of things you haven't done or you did a long time ago and you want to come back to them?
My ultimate goal, I've been shooting underwater video 30 years, and I would like to be able to interest the national television network and share what we've done with the general public. I mean, few people realize that German U-boats roamed up and down our coast during World War II, and at the start, torpedoing ships at will. And I've had the good fortune that to have dove on some of these ships in North Carolina, where that area is called the graveyard of the Atlantic.
Right.
So yeah, that's sort of my main goal, and I'm still shooting video.
Right.
You know, and I still do these presentations. Senior citizens, the VA. Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts.
Sure,
so
people who are interested in history.
Exactly.
Do you ever go on cruise ships?
No. Oh, I went on a cruise ship once.
Where they have you speak and you're a speaker? Oh.
No, it was just a...
You should.
That's right.
It was underwater, though, this cruise ship. It's called the Andrea Doria.
If it was, yeah. I dove on the Andrea Doria, which, as my friend Billy Campbell, who I absolutely love, he's been my closest friend for 40 plus years. Billy once said that the Andrea Doria looks like the Empire State Building on its side.
Oh.
And it's massive, it's gigantic. And I dove another cruise ship in Grenada called the Bianca Sea. And that was owned by the Costa Line. And Bianca was the owner's daughter. See, and again, like I said at the beginning of this program, if you don't know the history, you might as well dive a rock. But, if you dive on this vessel and you know that it was the Costa Line, or for that matter, the Doria, to dive on that and then know the history, it puts a whole new perspective.
Has the, since you've been doing this for many, many years, has the technology of the cameras, has it made it easier for you to be able to do this kind of work?
Oh, it's incredible. From high 8, from regular 8 to high 8, standard def, high def, and now 4K. It's incredible what they have.
And small.
Yeah.
Yes, so that it's not a big weight for you to get down there with this
The first time I ever did an underwater shot, the housing weighed 60 pounds, and it was a 16mm Bolex that had, you could only run it for 3 minutes. And that was it. You took this huge thing underwater and hoped you got the shot because you only had 3 minutes to go.
Right.
So.
See, my video, I don't want, it's not because I consider myself a Mr. Fantastic underwater video. It's because I have had the opportunity of redundancy. Like, for example, on the German U-boat off Block Island, the visibility is probably averaging 10 feet. Now, since I jumped in the water with the camera every time, I hit that magic day when it was 100 feet. So from the deck of the wreck, I could look up and I could see the bottom of my boat. And that's why some of the video that I have, I think is great. Because of redundancy. North Carolina, and some of it can't be repeated. We found a submarine, the USS Tarpon. And the Tarpon was the first all-welded submarine built an electric boat, launched in 35 or 36, and pulled into Pearl Harbor on December the 6th, 1941 for rest and recuperation, only to be awakened the next morning by Japanese aircraft.
Right.
And shortly thereafter, she made her first war patrol. She made 11 war patrols all together
What's a war patrol?
Going out looking for the enemy for
Okay.
X amount of days.
Okay.
She was stuck on a, there is a poem, she was stuck on a rock, and a missionary wrote out to her and said, listen, your best bet of getting off is get everything out of this boat that you can, unload it, and then at 12 midnight, now mind you, the Japanese are all over. Then back off with everything you got at 12 midnight, because that's the highest tide of the month. And the tarpon made it off. Only to be turned over after the war and used as a reserve training aid. In 1957, they had no more use for her, but she refused to be cut up like like an old tin can. And while being towed to Baltimore, she slowly slipped her tow line and sank in 150 feet of water off Cape Hatteras.
Oh, wow.
And I had the great pleasure, myself and the people that I was with, and again, it's not me.
Right.
It's all of us. We opened it up, and I was the first one inside the hatch. And it was like, wow. It was back in 1957 and 1945. And, you know, again, it's history. It was the first all-welded sub. And to me, I would prefer to save some of these warships, because the men that served them and made the ultimate sacrifice, you know, it shouldn't be just scrapped.
Right.
You know?
Right.
So the tarpon is sitting there.
Waiting for you.
Yep, and her only friends are sharks, big sand tigers that patrol up and down the sides. So yeah.
Are you like a little fraternity of people around the world that do this? I mean, do you stay in contact with a bunch of people that have this great passion like you do?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I mean, it's a small community, and I would go anywhere, just about, within reason or within cost, you know, to dive on some of these ships because of the historical value.
Well, you went out to the Truck Lagoon, right?
Yeah, we went to Truck, which is now Chuk, and that's in the Pacific.
The Pacific, okay.
Yeah, that was a Japanese naval base / anchorage area, repair base, and it was. We bypassed it on the way to Japan because we didn't want to lose any more guys. So we bypassed it, and we bombed the heck out of it during Operation Hailstone.
Okay. What year is this? Do you know? 1943, 1944?
I want to say 1945.
Okay, the end of the war.
Yeah, because we were island hopping and trying to get as close to Japan as we could. And we destroyed over 200 aircraft and sank 40-plus ships inside the harbor, and these ships are in remarkable state of preservation. Just incredible.
Is there a reason why that's true?
I think it's because that the typhoons / hurricanes are not in that area, that they start a little ways further down.
Okay.
Whereas like in our area, you know, our ships are falling apart because of the hurricanes. And the power of the sea, dove on a ship. I don't mean to take away from the truck, but just to show you the power of the sea, there was a ship that was intentionally sunk off Key Largo, Florida. Yeah. And it was the Spiegel Grove. Now, when they sank it, they messed up, and she settled upside down. So when the tourist diver, it was in 130 feet of water, so when the typical tourist diver went out, there wasn't a heck of a lot to see. Well, heck, a year or two later, a hurricane came through. Now, this ship is 500 and some odd feet long. It lifted it up in 130 feet of water and set it upright.
Wow.
So, now picture this. If you've ever walked in the mud in your shoe or boot, or, you know, you couldn't pull your foot back out.
Right.
That mud had a death grip on that ship, but yet a hurricane was able to pick it up and toss it.
Wow.
So
wow.
now you go back to truck. They don't have those there, and these ships are, I mean, ships, aircraft sitting on the bottom, they're incredible, just incredible.
So if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do it? By email? They email you?
Either way.
So what's the best way? So they can call you, and we have your telephone number there.
Yeah.
And it's captainbillpalmer@gmail.com. That's
Correct.
the way to get you.
Yeah.
And you can call you up, get you an email, get a copy of your book, find out what your latest stuff is, right?
Absolutely.
Going on. And Greg, if they want to get somebody to do some kind of filming, you don't only go underwater, I suspect.
No, right.
Okay,
right.
so Greg, where's the best way people can contact you?
Email is
Okay,
really the best.
email Petties with an S production at Verizon.net. That's the way to get you.
That's right, yeah.
And Lisa, I know how to find you, but how does the rest of the world find you?
They can just go to my website, authorlisasaunders.com, and all my projects and shows and all that are there.
That's great. That's great. So I want to invite you to go and check out all these wonderful opportunities to find out about shipwrecks right here nearby in our own coastal waters. And I also want to let you know, so my great passion is literature. You know, from seeing my show that I write mysteries under the pen name of Anastasia Goodman. But more important than just I wanting to sell my books is I want to let the world know about our wonderful local authors. So I have been creating what I call literary salons, and I've gotten a great deal of support from some venues in Westerly, Rhode Island. So if you're in the neighborhood and you want to hear local authors read and discuss and talk about the whole writing process, have a glass of beer, have a glass of wine. On Wednesdays, on the third Wednesday of every month, we have Tapped Apple, which is a winery and cidery, which is in downtown Westerly, 37 High Street. Come on down and hear some authors read their stuff. Talk to them about the writing process. That's Wine and Words. Then we have, on the fourth Tuesday of every month, my friend Colin Bennett, the owner of the Malted Barley. He lets us have Books and Brews. Again, another opportunity for local writers to be heard, to be seen, and for you to enjoy what they have to offer. And then coming in August, we're going to have the Poets Corner, the first Wednesday of every month at the Tapped Apple. So I'm inviting poets to come forward. Contact me at GraysonHarriet@gmail.com and tell me about a poet, or you are a poet and you would like to have the rest of the world know about you. So this is Harriet Grayson, your host and producer of Community Culture Showcase. Come back and see us again and enjoy summertime.